good. All right, I think there's a pattern here. Much like Catherine, I'm an export too. I exported myself physically out of India a few years ago and lived and worked in a few different countries since then. And some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are things that I didn't just read in a report. These are things that I observed, experienced, lived through in many different countries as my work at Google took me all over the world. Just in the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to travel to about 15 different countries. It's hard on my family, but I learn a lot. So from countries as diverse as Turkey, Brazil, Singapore, and on, mobile is kind of what it's all about. So I'm going to make my case to you very, very quickly. I could talk about this all day, but I'll try and do this in about 20 minutes, okay? I'm here to argue that mobile should be at the core of your international expansion strategy, not as an optional add-on, but actually right at the heart of it. And I'm not going to try and make my case throwing boring old stats like this. Smartphones outship personal computers 2:1. Who cares? I'm not also going to try and rely on stats like this. 1.4 billion Android devices were active worldwide on a 30-day basis, grow the 400 million devices in just a single year, right? I might, however, ask you to pay attention to this one, which is that Google now has made a transition to being a mobile-first company. I don't think this is quite caught on, with the press and our advertisers and a lot of and even perhaps Wall Street. But we are now officially and finally a mobile-first company. We've made the transition from a desktop-centric software company to being a mobile company. And to the extent that mobile matters and is a part of your marketing mix, I think this has implications for all of us together. Now, I don't want to stand up here and gin up the differences between countries and try and make this any more complicated than it has to be. I don't want to talk about, I don't want to cherry pick stats and say Koreans have more apps installed than Chinese or have more apps than Japanese. And we could go on and on about stats like that. But I actually first want to, pause and talk a little bit about how consumers all around the world are interacting with their mobile devices in remarkably similar ways. For us, this fits in very nicely with a marketing framework we've been using called micro moments. I think many of you have been exposed to that idea at, 2015 event, so I won't reintroduce the concept to you. I will, however, use this to kind of demonstrate how consumers all around the world are behaving in similar ways. And as the book that I kind of quickly went past by talks about, we're living in an age where there's a common stream of consciousness all around the world, and consumers that have the purchasing power. Obviously, I'm not talking about different socioeconomic classes here, but for consumers that you're after, they have similar set of ideas, values, and the behaviors are remarkably consistent. Here's what I mean. Let's take an extreme example. I know that farmers selling fresh produce off of boats in Philippines are not exactly your target audience, but let's for a minute pretend that they are, okay? And assume that some of them actually have smartphones, have the purchasing power to plan a vacation to Greece. Their behavior and their engagement with Google and with smartphones will be very similar to a consumer in New York or San Francisco. And here's what I mean by that. They're going to go through a series of micro moments. I want to buy, I want to do, I want to know, I want to go. And the treatment of and how you approach these consumers isn't very different from what you might do in a country like the United States or the United Kingdom, right? These consumers might, if they just want to know what Greece is all about, they might, in their local language, search for something about Greece. That's their I want to know moment. I want to go moment. If they want to go and talk to a travel agent, you can't obviously physically have stores everywhere, but instead you could run a call ad if you have the infrastructure to receive calls from overseas, especially from English-speaking consumers. So that isn't very different either. If they want to find out what to do in Greece once they get there, and if you have content marketing built around different countries, and if you're obviously in the travel aggregation business, you might want to serve up an ad and drive them to your content in a local language if that's possible. And lastly, when they're ready to buy, and the search on keywords like hotels in Greece, you should be there ready to answer that question and take their money with a well-optimized mobile site, right? So I want to focus for a second on the implications of this. I'll talk about three things that I'd like you to pay attention to, and I'll talk about three action items that you should consider investing in. The first one is, much like consumers in the Western world, consumers are driven to search and to Google and driven to their smartphones on pretty much any stimuli. It could be a conversation with a friend, a television commercial, a billboard. The way that they express themselves is through Google search for the most part, right? And the action for you is to kind of just be moments ready, have the infrastructure and the mapping, the consumer path analysis ready to go. And in some cases, the only real difference is that The local conditions, festivals, holidays, those kinds of things are obviously different. So you need to find the equivalent of the Independence Day, Thanksgiving, and so on. But other than that, I think the phrases, the thoughts that people are asking Google are somewhat consistent. The second one is they have remarkably high expectations when they're searching on Google from businesses. They're on a boat, remember? So they don't have a lot of patience to wrestle with poorly optimized or websites that render poorly on a smartphone. So you need a pretty high standard. You need to meet a pretty high standard on your mobile UX. And we've been talking about something called the 25 design principles, and I think some of you have actually taken advantage of that. But you haven't, you should invest in it because the principles are universal. Fast load times, obvious, search that's easy to find and access, and things like that. The last one is unscripted decisions. Consumers, again, remember back to that boat example. They just have a few spare moments. They fire up their smartphone, they search, and they may not instantly make a purchase. They might decide to go back home and fire up their laptop and finish the transaction. So the measurement aspect doesn't change, whether you're trying to sell to Mexican customers or Malaysian customers. So these are three things that are remarkably consistent. No matter where in the world I travel or any of our product managers go, they're seeing the same things and the same ideas. The case for having a sites-first strategy doesn't change one bit either. I know there's like some overwhelming statistics about Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, where they tell you about, a Chinese consumer has 150 apps on a smartphone versus just 21 in the United States or something like that. I don't think that matters a whole lot. If you're in the business of introducing your brand for the very first time to an international audience, I don't think it matters one bit. I guess some of you have heard about the toothbrush test, which I think Larry Page, our former CEO, perhaps was the first one to talk about. It's this simple idea that if you're in the business that doesn't need constant and frequent, almost daily engagement, you don't need an apps-first strategy, right? A lot of transactions in the retail industry and travel actually happens on the mobile web. So the case for having a sites-first strategy does not change. As an example, I picked Google for Work. Imagine somebody in Mountain View trying to sell or find enterprise leads for our cloud storage solutions from a purchasing manager in Japan. Can you imagine us forcing a purchasing manager to download an app first before we tell them what we have, right? It's just sites are how people naturally find, discover businesses, do their research, and sign up for more information. And that actually means that cross-device conversions, that's something we've been talking about for 2 years, is also pretty remarkably consistent as a pattern. For example, in Japan, you see about the same cross-device conversion lift as you see in the United States. 16 conversions for every 100 in the case of travel, and you can see a few others up here. We have this data by country, and again, there's a lot of consistency in how consumers start on one device, finish up on another device. So you need to kind of understand how those things tie together using our cross-device measurement solutions. Now, on the flip side, the case for having an apps-first strategy doesn't change either. I know there's gaming companies in the room here, but if you're in the business of selling apps, we're not suggesting, we're not trying to push you to the web, right? My 5-year-old daughter and I are obsessed with Angry Birds. Work is what happens between games of Angry Birds too. So high frequency, use it 3, 5, 10 times a day. It's a piece of software. It needs to make use of native capabilities of your device, like offline capabilities, your camera, and so on. Yeah, in those cases, absolutely, apps make all the sense in the world. And so that doesn't change either. Just because you're in China versus India versus Brazil, it's the same consistent use case. And by the way, sometimes people are like, oh, Google just wants to drive everybody to the web because that's what they do. That's not true. We're more than happy to take your money if you want to do app installs at scale. In a lot of countries, in China in particular, it's actually the only thing we can kind of do because we don't do search and other things there. So we now have, this wasn't the case, to be quite candid, about 2.5, 3 years ago. We now have a class-leading app install solution. We can drive app installs through Google Play. I talked about Android having 1.4 billion active devices on a 30-day basis. So imagine running ads in the Play Store. I know that some of you do, and it's a product that's still scaling. And if you want to drive app installs, try that first. We can run app install ads in search, in third-party apps, on the mobile web, and then, of course, other owned and operated properties like YouTube and Gmail. This company, Nexon in Korea, the first port of call every time they have a new game to sell in Korea is YouTube, because 40% of the adult population in Korea goes to YouTube every single month. So you get tremendous reach and tremendous scale. In China, I mentioned a moment ago, 150 million Chinese users download apps on the AdMob network. So tremendous scale. And then the CPI, I know, will make zero sense to anybody outside the gaming industry, but we think for Korea that's a pretty competitive cost per install. Getting a little tactical there, but I think that matters for gaming companies. Here's what else is kind of remarkably consistent. The percentage of ad spend on mobile is kind of in line with what's happening in the United States. One source puts that number at about $45 billion of total advertising money on smartphones, not including tablets, by 2017 or 18. And in China, that number is remarkably close. It's $22 billion of projected ad spend in China in 2016. What I'm trying to get to here is that if you're trying to compete with local marketers in these different countries, you cannot succeed with a desktop-centric strategy, because those local marketers are, in fact, shifting aggressively to mobile. So you want to keep pace with that. And I could talk all day about how mobile display advertising, which is another powerful medium for you outside of search in a lot of international markets, that's pretty remarkable. A couple of years ago, people used to say mobile display ads suck. They're too tiny, nobody can see them, they're spammy, and so on. We've invested a lot to turn them into nicer looking ad units that use a lot of additional signals, audience signals. And we're actually now using material design, which is our language that we use on the Android operating system for some of our ad units on the mobile web as well. So they're performing remarkably well. Certainly, these folks are a little different as well. They have different local conditions. They're on a boat in the Philippines after all, right? So let me maybe spend a few minutes talking about some core differences that you need to be aware of as you think about internationalization on mobile. So the first one is, actually, I've got a couple of stats that are interesting that are on the upside, on the positive side. In a lot of countries, at least 5 or 6 countries that we've seen recently, mobile is a primary device, which is not necessarily the case in Western markets, because a lot of us have 4, 5, 6 devices for every household. So in a lot of these countries, mobile is actually the only device in many cases. And by mobile, I don't mean feature phones that can't access the web. I mean smartphones, like the Motorola G, right? So mobile becomes even more important, not less important. So that's something to be aware of. The second one is mobile commerce. Interestingly, the United States is not the leader in mobile commerce. There are countries like China, South Korea, and other places where mobile commerce rates are higher, and they're actually growing much faster than in the United States. So there's a tendency to say, well, the US is a sophisticated market, which of course it is, because this is where a lot of the technology leadership is coming from. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the American consumer is always ahead, right? There's countries outside the US, consumers are buying quite comfortably on mobile devices. So we ran actually a study with a major fashion retailer out of Europe, and they actually went into this global study expecting to see lower conversion rates consistently, right, outside of their home country. But they're very, very surprised, pleasantly so, that in many countries, conversion rates were dramatically higher. This is in spite of not having fully localized homepages. We're trying to get this case study public. We'll be sure to send it around when that happens. But this is pretty exciting stuff. And again, if you don't necessarily see the kind of conversion rates that you'd like to see in the United States, let that not discourage you from trying mobile commerce in Japan, China, Latin America, and so on. But there are a couple of challenges that you need to be aware of. One is around just network connectivity. It sucks in many, many countries. Even for affluent consumers that have all the purchasing power in the world, they just don't have the infrastructure in place. For example, in Brazil, the average television show that you can stream in just, I don't know, a couple of minutes can take about 1.4 hours to fully download and play. 1.5 hours, right? The takeaway here is that if your sites are filled with rich media and or video heavy, then you might want to rethink that, because that's not necessarily going to work in a lot of countries, no matter, like I said, how affluent the consumers might be. Here's another statistic. The average Indonesian consumer spends about 1/5 their daily wage on consuming data. What does that mean? Well, again, you can't have page load times that are slow. Actually, by the way, checked out many of your websites. I will not name names, but some of you have troublesome mobile web pages. I think you know who you are. And so some of you, actually one of you, is serving a desktop site on a mobile phone. That's bad. right? So the point I'm trying to make is that if you're going to reach consumers all around the world with slow page load times, with sites that have a lot of video and rich media, et cetera, that's designed for a Western consumer, that's going to be challenging because they just don't have the patience or the money to spend on data, right? So you might want to do something like this, light, fast loading, et cetera, especially if you have the opportunity to localize it in that language. Otherwise, having lots of words without pictures is actually not the right idea. Another simple thing to be aware of, I think Catherine kind of hinted at this, pictures travel easier than words as you go global, even in the case of English-speaking consumers. A lot of people in Philippines, India, Singapore, lots of countries where the people speak reasonably good English, but a text-heavy English website isn't necessarily your best bet. So you might want to run something like this that has pictures and it can easily translate across borders. Well, that's it. I said I'd be quick. Like I said, I could talk all day about this. We could talk about design principles. We could talk about, is mobile web really the right way to go? We could talk about search coverage and keywords and ad text and formats and pricing. But the fundamentals are just these 4 things, right? Just understand your consumer, map their their path, and by that I mean local customs, local holidays, local festivals that may encourage them to search for your specific business. And for the tech B2B industry, I know it's a separate set of things that you need to think about. Mobile display is vital. It isn't just a game about search. In a lot of countries, display actually outperforms search. I guess I'm not supposed to say it, but sometimes it does. In Southeast Asia in particular. So if you want to expand out to some of those countries, mobile displays should be your first port of call. Again, like I said, happy to take your money if driving app installs is what you're after. I'm not talking about gaming companies. For gaming companies, that's the obvious motivation to work with Google. But even if outside of the context of gaming, if driving app installs is what you want, it's what we can give you, because we have a massive cross-platform solution across many of our properties that work together seamlessly. And the last point, think slow. Connectivity is problematic. Wi-Fi speeds are slow. Many countries still have 2G, not even 3G, 2G speeds. But these are consumers that do have the purchasing power to interact with your business. It's just that they don't have the infrastructure locally. So pay attention to your mobile websites. That's it. Thank you.